A while back, Theoretical Bullshit produced a video which was mirrored by Venaloid on the things Christians couldn't account for. Now, in fairness, the context was of him responding to presuppositionalists who would likely neither answer these questions nor concern themselves with their own burden of proof to do so. And of course, I agree that presuppositionalism, like all other forms of circular reasoning, is and will always be a fallacy. That being said, being a Christian myself and liking a good challenge, I figured I would take a stab at them. So what are these questions Theoretical Bullshit said I couldn't answer?
Why does God exist instead of not existing? Why? Why does God have the traits and qualities he has instead of other traits and other qualities? Why is God's will effective rather than ineffective or partially effective? As a Christian, these are things that you cannot account for.
Now I'll attempt to answer the first question, and along the way, the answers to 2 and 3 should become apparent. Premise 1. Minds have the property that they could exist in a possible solipsist world. As proof, nothing we experience is such that we could not also experience it in a dream world. Premise 2. Matter does not have this property. Matter existing in an immaterial world is of course a contradiction in terms. Thus by Leibniz's law, matter and mind cannot be the same thing as they do not share all the same properties. Conclusion 1. Therefore, mind is immaterial. Premise 3. Substance dualism is false for the obvious reasons that an immaterial object cannot physically interact with a material object. Conclusion 2. Thus we can conclude that matter cannot possibly exist and that monistic idealism entails. Thus we arrive at the first half of the argument. This may sound like a far-out conclusion, but you may be surprised just how well the physics supports it. And if our science tells us that the world is an illusion, and yet we innately know that the mind is not, then it becomes apparent which is more fundamental and which emerges from which. At this point, this allows us to answer the other two questions. Why does God have the properties he does? Naturally, any mind containing the universe would know everything about it by definition, and be everywhere in it. Likewise, in regards to omnipotence, God's will is effective by virtue of the fact that God has control over the contents of his own mind, just like we all do. But why should this God exist at all, rather than not exist? Premise 4. Mathematical conceptualizations of conscious states are indistinguishable from real conscious states. At first, this premise may sound quite tenuous and surreal, so to justify it, I will defer to Brian Greene's argument for Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis.
Now, this simulated multiverse gives you a way of thinking about that, because if you and I are right now in a computer simulation, this is pretty good. It feels real to me, right? This definitely is a good masquerade for the reality that we have long thought to be out there, not in a computer simulation. But if this is a computer simulation, imagine opening up that computer. What's going on inside? It's just a lot of ones and zeros being manipulated by mathematical equations. So if this is a computer simulation, just take that on board for a second, we would be mathematics. We would be what mathematics feels. Reality would simply be the unfolding of mathematical equations. And that's the sense in which at least it's possible that math can be more than just a mere description. Math could be reality.
Thus we, the universe, and God's mind are, so to speak, in the math, or perhaps better yet, are the math itself. And so we arrive at conclusion 3. An idealist reality is identical with a mathematical or Platonic reality. And lastly, and perhaps most intuitively, premise 5, Platonic reality is innately existent. Ideas just are. An idea, by definition, can never not exist.
Of course, if you say that we exist because something else created this, and then something else created that, you're always sort of looking for one more thing that made that. But I think there is one kind of object out there which was clearly not created ever, and they are mathematical objects, like the cube. I'm not talking about a sugar cube or a particularly physical cube here, but just the mathematical object known as to mathematicians as the cube, or the dodecahedron, or the sphere, or a vector space, or whatnot. These things,
these concepts,
they clearly exist outside of space and time. They were not, the cube wasn't created 14 billion years ago, right? And yet you still feel that it exists in the sense that it's not like we invented the cube. The whole idea that there could be a cube was very not arbitrary at all. One of the most amazing things I think we've discovered over the centuries in theoretical physics is that there's mathematics everywhere. Galileo exclaimed that nature is, the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics, right? And after he had made that observation, people discovered still more irregularities and amazing mathematical relations. Wigner wrote a famous essay in the 60s saying, this is unreasonable, how can math work so well? And then after that, the standard model of particle physics was discovered. And I think that the reason that nature is so well described by math is because, in a very deep sense, it really is math.
Conclusion 4. Therefore, God, as an ultimate Platonic existent, exists by necessity. And now you know why God exists rather than not exists. Lastly, after Theoretical Bullshit's questions, Veniloid added one of his own.
One other question that Theoretical Bullshit did not get around to in this video is, why does God have to act consistently with his nature? Because then he would not be God. So why can't God be not God? Because that would be illogical. Okay, but that's just saying that God has to act according to his logical nature, or in the case of being not God, his divine nature. That still doesn't answer why does God have to act consistently with his nature.
So why must God obey the laws of logic? Why does God need a proverbial logos? To answer this, we need only ask what the ultimate Platonic form is, the one form that contains all others. If you liked this video, subscribe, and don't forget to check out my novel, Malaris, The Lances of Light, on Amazon Kindle in the description below. Now you can find us on Facebook at Idealism and Science versus Atheism. This mind is the matrix of all matter.